The year was 2257, and humanity had already spread its wings far beyond the confines of Earth. Dozens of colonies, ranging from the icy plains of Europa to the lush forests of Terra 5, were thriving. They weren't just surviving, they were building, innovating, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible. As the human race looked to the stars, they saw endless potential. However, not all was peaceful in the vast expanse of space. Tensions had been mounting with the Draxian Empire, a race as old as the galaxy itself. The Draxians had ruled over their portion of the universe for millennia, often looking down on lesser species, and they had always regarded humanity as nothing more than a fleeting curiosity. To them, humans were nothing but pests, weak and insignificant. That is, until the Draxians made their fatal mistake. On a quiet day, Terra 7, a human colony at the edge of the galaxy, received a sudden and unexpected blow. Without warning, Draxian warships appeared in the sky, unleashing an unrelenting barrage of bombs and missiles. The explosions shook the very ground, tearing through the once vibrant cities, turning thriving metropolises into smoking ruins. Millions perished within hours, and the once bustling colony was left in a state of chaos. The Draxians believed they had struck the final blow, that this act of devastation would break the human spirit. Their plan was simple: deliver a crushing blow, instill terror, and force humanity to bow down before their might. But the Draxians had made one fatal error. They had underestimated humanity. They had failed to see what the rest of the galaxy could not yet understand. Humans were not easily defeated. In the face of tragedy, the human colonies did not bend or break. Instead, the attack on Terra 7 ignited a fire that burned across every human settlement. News of the destruction spread like wildfire. Colonies from every corner of the galaxy rose up, united not by fear, but by fury. No longer would they tolerate the arrogance of the Draxians. No longer would they bow their heads in submission. The Draxians thought they had crushed humanity's hope, but they had only awakened something far greater. Across the human colonies, the shock of the bombing quickly turned to action. Messages of defiance and resistance flooded communication channels, calling for unity and strength. Leaders from various colonies, once focused on their own survival, now worked together. The anger was palpable, the desire for justice unmistakable. The humans, each a part of something greater than themselves, found a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Terra 7 anymore. This was about every human, every colony, every life. The Draxians had made a grave mistake in thinking they could break the spirit of humanity with a single blow. Instead, they had sparked a war, one that would echo through the galaxy. And yet, as the humans gathered their forces, something was brewing beneath the surface. Unknown to the Draxians, the human race had a secret. Hidden deep in the archives of the colonies, buried in forgotten legends and long-forgotten technologies, were the keys to humanity's survival, the sleeping giants. These were not mere weapons. They were something more, something older than the Draxian Empire itself. And the attack on Terra 7, brutal as it was, had awakened them. As the human forces prepared for war, they found themselves not just fighting for survival but for something far greater, the future of their species. The Draxians had made their move, but they had unknowingly stirred something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. The stage was set, and the conflict that would shape the galaxy for centuries to come was only just beginning. The Draxians, in their arrogance, had pushed humanity to the edge, but instead of breaking, the humans had found a strength they had never known they had. The galaxy would soon learn that when you awaken humanity's sleeping giants, there is no going back. The first strike had been delivered, but it would not be the last. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in the quiet and often forgotten corridors of the United Alliance of Systems, UAS, a team of brilliant scientists worked tirelessly in secret. These were not the kind of researchers who sought fame or fortune. Their task was much greater. Hidden. From the public, they were charged with studying alien technologies that had been collected from previous encounters with other civilizations. Years of research had yielded many answers, but there was one puzzle that had remained elusive. Until now. As they delved deeper into the data, combing through the vast archives of alien artifacts, they stumbled upon something truly extraordinary. In the midst of what had seemed like an ordinary project, they discovered a series of strange devices, ancient weapons unlike anything they had ever encountered. At first, the scientists thought these were just another set of alien tools, perhaps, relics from a long-dead race. But something about them was different. The machines, seemingly inert and dormant, reacted in subtle ways to human proximity, almost as though they were alive. It was an odd thing to describe. These weapons seemed to hum with an energy that resonated not just with the surrounding environment, but with the human scientists themselves. It wasn't just that the machines were technologically advanced. They seemed to interact with humanity's unique biology. For a moment, the researchers stood in awe, unsure of what to make of it. They had uncovered something far more significant than anyone had anticipated, something that was tied to Earth's long-forgotten past. As they continued to analyze the devices, they made a staggering discovery. These weren't just weapons. These were sleeping giants, machines that had been hidden for millennia, waiting for the day when humanity would need them most. They had been carefully concealed deep within the fabric of human history, a secret buried so far beneath the surface that even the most advanced technologies of today had missed it. Some of these machines were colossal war machines, capable of unleashing destruction on a scale previously unimaginable. Others were biological constructs, ancient and powerful, designed to defend Earth at all costs. It became clear to the scientists that these machines had been left behind long ago, not just as weapons but as protectors of humanity, meant to rise only when the species was in dire need of them. The more the team studied, the more they realized the full scope of the discovery. These machines were scattered throughout the galaxy, hidden on distant planets, in deep space, and in the forgotten corners of the universe. They were part of a forgotten network that was somehow linked to Earth itself. They had been dormant for centuries, possibly even longer. But something had triggered them. Something had awakened them from their long slumber. And then, as the Draxian attacks on the human colonies grew bolder and more destructive, the machines began to stir. It wasn't an immediate reaction, nor was it one that could be easily seen. The first signs were subtle, slight tremors in the deep core of distant planets, faint energy pulses from the farthest reaches of space. But these small movements were the first ripples in a much larger event that was unfolding across the galaxy. The sleeping giants, once thought to be only myths, were awakening. In the research labs beneath Earth, the team realized that the time to act had arrived. The attacks on Terra 7 and other colonies were no longer isolated incidents. They were the catalyst, the spark that had triggered the ancient machines. As the Draxians continued to increase their assaults, the machines slowly powered up, their dormant circuits coming back to life. The scientists watched, breathless, as the machines began to react to the rising threat. They had always known the day would come when these machines would be needed, but even they hadn't anticipated how quickly it would happen. The humans were on the verge of unlocking the full potential of these ancient weapons. What had started as a desperate search for answers had now turned into a race against time. The Draxians had unwittingly pushed humanity to the brink, but in doing so, they had unwittingly awakened an ancient power that would fight for humanity's survival. As the scientists rushed to decode the final secrets of these machines, they understood that the galaxy was on the cusp of a monumental shift. Humanity, once seen as weak and insignificant, was now on the brink of unleashing a force that could reshape the galaxy itself. The sleeping giants were awake, and the Draxians had no idea what was coming for them. The Draxian Empire, confident in its superiority, had no doubt that humanity's attempts at retaliation would be easily crushed. After all, they were a powerful, ancient species with advanced technologies and an immense fleet that had swept through countless systems over the centuries. The Draxians believed that humanity, with its relatively small and fragmented colonies, would never stand a chance against their might. They assumed the humans would cower, surrender, and retreat to the shadows. However, they were gravely mistaken. The moment the machines, the ancient weapons humanity had only just awakened, began to stir, the tide of the war began to shift. The Draxians had no idea what was coming. Humanity's top scientists, now working alongside military strategists, quickly coordinated their efforts, utilizing not only the newly discovered weapons, but also the wealth of human ingenuity and determination. These machines, some of them ancient warships and others powerful biological constructs, turned the tide against the Draxians in ways no one had predicted. Across the galaxy, a series of skirmishes erupted. The first waves of Draxian fleets, overconfident and accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer firepower, were taken aback by the unexpected resistance. The ancient weapons that humans had unleashed were unlike anything the Draxians had ever seen. Massive war machines, once thought to be mere relics of a forgotten era, tore through the Draxian defenses. New technologies, based on the alien artifacts that humanity had slowly mastered over the years, were deployed with deadly precision. At first, the Draxians believed this was merely a lucky streak for the humans. But as the battles raged on, it became clear that humanity was not simply fighting to survive. They were fighting with an intensity and resolve that the Draxians had underestimated. The human forces, bolstered by the newly awakened machines, began to push back, one system at a time. Each victory fueled the next, each win growing humanity's confidence. Slowly but surely, the humans gained the upper hand. On the front lines of this brutal war, new leaders emerged. These were not the traditional military commanders or well-known generals who had been trained for such battles. These were ordinary, men and women who had once lived simple lives, perhaps on distant colonies or quiet mining worlds, but had been thrust into the chaos of war. The brutality of the Draxian attack and the loss of so many friends and family had ignited something fierce in them. They were not just fighting for their survival, they were fighting for their future. One by one, these leaders emerged as legends. There was Commander Alina Voss, a former scientist turned strategist, whose brilliant mind and relentless determination led humanity's first successful counteroffensive. She had once worked in the fields of bioengineering, but now she commanded fleets of warships and coordinated the human resistance. Then there was Captain Marcos Steele, a former miner from the outskirts of Terra 5, who had no military training but a fire in his belly that inspired thousands of soldiers. His raw courage and unshakable belief in the human spirit made him an icon among the troops. Together, they rallied humanity's forces, driving them forward through every battle, every skirmish, and every hardship. As these leaders rose, the Draxians began to realize they had made a grave mistake in underestimating humanity. Their once invincible fleets were now being dismantled piece by piece, their once impenetrable defenses slowly crumbling. The human military, once disorganized and scattered, had become a force to be reckoned with. The ancient weapons had been the catalyst, but it was the will of humanity, their indomitable spirit, that gave them the strength to face the impossible. The Draxians, who had believed themselves untouchable, were now fighting for their survival. The battle was no longer just a war of technology, it was a battle of wills. Humanity, once seen as weak and fragmented, had proven that they were far stronger than anyone had given them credit for. And as each victory piled upon the next, the Draxians began to realize just how dangerous the human spirit truly was. This was no longer a fight for survival. It was a fight for dominance, and the humans were not about to lose. The counterattack had begun, and the galaxy was watching as the balance of power slowly began to tip in humanity's favor. As the war between humanity and the Draxians raged on, something extraordinary was unfolding behind the scenes. The humans, now emboldened by their victories and the awakening of ancient weapons, began to uncover the full scale of what had been hidden from them for centuries. The so-called sleeping giants were not merely a handful of ancient machines, but a vast network of colossal ships scattered across the galaxy in forgotten asteroid fields, buried deep beneath the surfaces of long-forgotten planets, and hidden in the darkest corners of space. These ships had been left behind by an ancient human empire, one that had vanished long before the rise of the Draxian Empire. Their purpose had always been clear: to fight in the name of humanity's survival, to defend their descendants when the time came. The humans had always known there was more to their history than what the records on Earth and the colonies told them, but they had never dreamed that these monumental relics still existed. Now, as the Draxian forces pressed forward, humanity's true legacy began to reveal itself. Among the ancient ships was the Argentum Reborn, a warship so massive it dwarfed even the largest of the Draxian battle fleets. It was a ship of unimaginable power, capable of laying waste to entire fleets with its devastating weaponry. It had been hidden for millennia, silently waiting for the moment when humanity would need it most. But the Argentum Reborn was not just a ship. It was a symbol of human ingenuity and resilience, a testament to what humanity had once achieved, and what they were now capable of again. The ship's systems had been dormant for centuries, but they had been designed to be self-sustaining, to awaken when the time was right. And now, that time had come. The ship's crew, however, was not made up of the original occupants. They were descendants of those who had once sailed aboard the first colony ships. These humans had long since forgotten their ancestors' legacy. But now, as the Argentum Reborn systems powered up, they were revived, their memories and skills restored to them. Volunteers from across the human colonies stepped forward, ready to serve once more aboard the great ship and fight for humanity's survival. With the Argentum Reborn at the helm, the human forces launched an unprecedented counteroffensive against the Draxians. The battles that followed were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Draxians, who had once believed themselves invincible, now found themselves facing a force unlike any other. The humans, armed with their ancient weapons and the mighty warships of the sleeping giants, began to strike back in ways the Draxians could never have anticipated. In space, the battles grew fiercer. The Argentum Reborn, with its massive cannons and advanced weaponry, cut through the Draxian fleets like a blade through paper. It was as if the tide of war had shifted overnight. What had once been a desperate fight for survival was now becoming a coordinated push to reclaim the galaxy from the Draxian Empire. The Draxians, who had once ruled with arrogance and superiority, now found themselves on the defensive, struggling to understand the unprecedented power that had awakened within humanity. The humans were not just fighting back, they were overpowering the Draxians, one battle at a time. The sight of the Argentum Reborn and its allied warships carving through the skies sent shockwaves through the Draxian ranks. Their once impregnable fleets were being torn apart, their soldiers pushed back, and their morale shattered. They could no longer deny that humanity had something far greater than they had imagined: a force of will, a legacy, and an arsenal of ancient power that had been awakened just when the Draxians thought they had won. As the war in space raged on, the humans grew more confident. They had tapped into something far older than the Draxian Empire, a strength that was built not just on technology, but on the very essence of humanity itself. And now, with the Argentum Reborn leading the charge, they were prepared to push the Draxians back, to reclaim the stars, and to ensure that humanity would never again be underestimated. The balance of power was shifting, and the Draxians were left scrambling, wondering what force they had truly awakened in humanity, a force that, it seemed, was unstoppable. As the war dragged on, the Draxians' confidence began to crumble. They had underestimated humanity at every turn, and now the scales were tipping. Their once unmatched fleets were in tatters, their dominance slipping away with every battle lost. The humans, aided by the mighty awakened machines, were no longer fighting merely to survive. They were fighting for victory, and with each passing day they grew stronger. The Draxians could no longer ignore the tide of war turning against them. Desperation began to take hold. In a final bid to crush humanity's spirit once and for all, they made a dangerous decision. A decision to strike at the heart of the human race, Earth itself. The Draxian fleets, now swollen with reinforcements, descended upon Earth with a single devastating objective: to break humanity's will to fight. They unleashed their full might, launching orbital bombardments and deploying massive fleets, their weapons aimed at the very core of human civilization. Their plan was clear: to raise the homeworld, to obliterate Earth's defenses, and to show the human race that resistance was futile. The Draxians believed that if they could destroy Earth, they could destroy the hope of the human colonies once and for all. They would make humanity bend, just as they had with countless other races before. What the Draxians failed to understand was the one thing that had fueled humanity's resistance from the beginning: an unshakable resolve. The humans had been tested, battered, and pushed to the edge of extinction, but every time they were knocked down, they rose up. The memory of Terra 7, the horrors of that attack, burned in the hearts of every human soldier, every fighter, every volunteer. The flames of rage and defiance had turned into a blazing fire, and no matter what the Draxians threw at them, humanity would not be crushed. Earth's defenses, once thought to be outdated and incapable of repelling a full-scale assault, were stronger than ever. The sleeping giants, those ancient weapons that had awakened in response to the threat, now stood at the ready. Massive warships, biological constructs, and devastating planetary defenses all synchronized, preparing to meet the Draxian onslaught. The humans had fought to build these defenses for generations, and now they would be tested in the ultimate battle. The Draxians had come to Earth thinking they would win, but they had forgotten that Earth was no ordinary target. As the Draxian fleets came closer, humanity's response was swift. From every corner of the Earth, from every human colony, the counteroffensive was launched. The sky above the planet burned with the glow of orbital weaponry, massive energy beams lancing out to meet the incoming Draxian ships. On the ground, the Earth shook with the force of ancient weaponry, the massive titans of war, once buried beneath the surface, now marching through Earth's cities, crushing anything in their path that threatened the human race. Their power was unstoppable, and with each passing minute, the Draxians found themselves on the back foot. But it wasn't just the weapons that made the difference. It was the people of Earth. Heroes, once ordinary men and women, now led the charge with strategies honed from years of bitter conflict. The leadership that had emerged in the wake of Terra 7's destruction was now at its peak. Commander Alina Voss, Captain Marcos Steele, and countless others coordinated every move with precision. They were no longer just fighting for their survival. They were fighting for their future, for the future of every human who had ever lived, and for every descendant who would follow. With every strike, with every blast, humanity's forces pushed back the Draxian invaders. The once proud Draxian fleets, now battered and disorganized, struggled to maintain their offensive. The humans, with their ancient weapons and unyielding spirit, were proving to be more than the Draxians had ever bargained for. The skies were filled with the roar of battle as the Draxians tried to regain control, but Earth's defenders refused to yield. The human forces, now unified like never before, were showing the galaxy that they would not be intimidated or broken. The battle for Earth had become the final stage of this interstellar war. The Draxians had come to crush the human spirit, but instead, they had awakened a fury that no empire could ever hope to defeat. Earth's defenses were stronger, its people more united, and its resolve unbreakable. The Draxians, who once believed themselves to be rulers of the stars, were now learning the hard truth. Humanity was not so easily defeated. The battle for Earth was only just beginning, but one thing was clear: humanity would not back down. Not now. Not ever. Amid the chaos of the war, as the battle for Earth raged on, a shocking revelation began to surface. Humanity, already fighting for survival against the relentless Draxians, had always believed the ancient machines and weapons they had awakened were relics of a forgotten human empire, buried deep in the past. The truth, however, was far more astonishing. These weapons, ships, and advanced technologies were not left behind by some long-lost civilization. They had been placed there intentionally, as a gift, but more importantly, as a safeguard. A safeguard against something far darker, far more dangerous than humanity could ever have imagined. As humanity continued to push back the Draxians, small fragments of information started to leak from the Draxian forces themselves. Whispers spread through their ranks, hushed conversations between their commanders, unintelligible murmurs over communications channels. The Draxians were terrified, their once confident posture faltering. They were not just fighting humanity. They were fighting to keep humanity distracted. The Draxians' assault on Earth, the brutal bombardments, the relentless push to crush humanity's spirit, was not the true reason they had come. It was a distraction. The Draxians knew something far worse was coming, something they dared not face alone. The enemy the Draxians feared was known as the Narek, a race of ancient, godlike beings whose power far exceeded anything the Draxians had ever encountered. The Narek were not just another alien species. They were sentient beings with the ability to reshape reality itself. Their destructive power was so vast that entire civilizations had been wiped out by their mere presence. The Draxians, who once considered themselves rulers of the stars, had themselves been nearly destroyed by the Narek in a forgotten conflict long before humanity had even stepped into the galaxy. The very technology that humanity now wielded, the ancient machines, the ships, the weapons, everything humanity had awakened, was part of a grand plan to protect them from this existential threat. The Draxians had known of the Narek for centuries, and it was their greatest fear. They had done everything in their power to suppress any knowledge of the Narek, hoping to keep the truth from the human colonies for as long as possible. They had even used their military strength to attack Earth, knowing that the awakening of the ancient technologies was a sign that humanity might be ready to face the Narek. But the Draxians also knew that humanity was not yet prepared. The Narek were coming, and the war with the Draxians was nothing more than an effort to buy time, to keep the humans focused on the wrong enemy. As the final battle for Earth unfolded, humanity was forced to reckon with this terrifying revelation. The stakes of the war had just become far greater than anyone had realized. No longer were they fighting merely for survival against a single empire, but against an existential threat that could wipe them from the galaxy entirely. The Draxians, though ruthless, had known that only the awakened human forces had a chance of standing against the Narek. That was why they had attacked Earth, to weaken humanity, to prevent them from ever fully realizing the truth about their own origins. Now, with the revelation of the Narek, the true test began. The foundations of humanity's understanding of its own history shook. They had always believed themselves to be the product of their own efforts, their own ingenuity. But now, they were faced with the realization that their very existence had been shaped by forces beyond their comprehension. The ancient machines, the weapons, the ships, they were all part of a much larger plan, a plan set in motion by an empire long lost to time, to protect humanity from an enemy even the Draxians feared. As the final stages of the battle for Earth unfolded, the question that loomed in every human heart was the same. Could they survive against the Narek? The Draxians had been right to fear them, but humanity had something the Narek had never counted on: unwavering determination. They had fought their way this far, and now, with the knowledge of the true threat ahead, they would not stop. Humanity might not be prepared for what was coming, but they were not going to face it unarmed. And as the skies above Earth burned with the light of the ongoing battle, a new kind of resolve began to form in the hearts of all those who had once called Earth their home. The real fight was just beginning, and humanity's greatest challenge was yet to come. The war with the Draxians had ended, but humanity's real struggle was only just beginning. The Draxian Empire, once the galaxy's most feared force, had been shattered, their fleets decimated, their strongholds crumbling. Yet, as one threat faded, another, far darker one, loomed on the horizon. The Narek, the ancient, godlike beings humanity had only recently learned about, were now heading toward Earth, bringing with them the promise of annihilation. The fear surrounding them was not just from the power they wielded, but from the terrifying knowledge that they had once wiped out entire civilizations with a mere thought. The Draxians had been right to fear them, and now humanity, unprepared and still recovering from their battle against the Draxians, had to face this new and unimaginable enemy. But this time, humanity was not the weak, fledgling species that had once been overlooked and underestimated by the galaxy. The years of war and the awakening of the ancient sleeping giants had transformed Earth and its colonies. The once disjointed human forces were now united, a single, coordinated force unlike anything the universe had ever seen. The sleeping giants, those ancient weapons, ships, and machines, were no longer just relics of a forgotten past. They were the foundation of humanity's strength, and with them, humanity had a fighting chance. As the Narek drew closer, humanity's resolve hardened. They knew the threat that awaited them was unlike anything they had ever faced, but the human spirit, tested time and again, would not be broken. Earth's defenders, bolstered by the power of the awakened giants, prepared for a confrontation that would determine the future of all civilizations. Every resource, every weapon, every lesson learned in the battles with the Draxians was now focused on one goal: survival. The forces of humanity, once scattered and outmatched, now stood together, ready to face the darkness head-on. The Narek were approaching, their godlike presence filling the galaxy with an overwhelming sense of dread. Their power was unmatched, their very existence a threat to everything in its path. But humanity, armed with the ancient knowledge and technology of their ancestors, would not yield. No longer were they a species struggling to survive in the shadows of more powerful civilizations. They were a species that had risen, that had fought, and that had earned their place among the stars. Humanity's stand was not just about defending Earth. It was about defending the future of all the colonies, of all the civilizations that had come to rely on humanity's resolve. It was about proving that no matter how impossible the odds, humanity would fight. The lessons learned from the brutal war with the Draxians, the unity forged in the fires of battle, now guided humanity's every move. In the face of the Narek, they would not falter. They had the strength of their ancestors behind them, the ancient machines that had once been dormant but now stood at the ready, prepared to unleash their full potential. In the final confrontation, as the Narek arrived in force, humanity made its stand. The skies above Earth burned with the fury of battle as humanity's warships, powered by the ancient technology, clashed with the overwhelming might of the Narek. The ground trembled beneath the weight of the titans of war as they marched to meet the invaders. Every human soldier, every pilot, Every commander fought with the fierce determination of those who had nothing left to lose, but everything to gain. They fought not just for Earth, but for the future of all civilizations, for the very survival of the human race. And as the Narek descended upon Earth, the human spirit burned brighter than ever. They were no longer a species that merely survived. They had become a species that thrived. The lessons of the past, the strength drawn from their ancestors, and the unity of their colonies gave humanity the courage to face even the darkest of enemies. The Narek had come to conquer, but humanity was ready. For the first time in their history, they were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to protect everything they had built, to ensure that the future would be theirs. The battle for Earth, for the galaxy, was about to begin. And humanity was ready to face the unknown. With the full power of the sleeping giants at their back, their hearts filled with hope, their resolve unbreakable,